Simon's return to Uzii was like the striking of a match in a dry forest. The people had been waiting, some openly and others in secret, for a leader who could give them the courage to believe in something beyond survival. With Simon there, they felt the tides shifting. Even the youngest children could sense that they were witnessing the start of something bigger than themselves. In the weeks after his return, Simon spent every day meeting with people from all corners of Biafra. Farmers, traders, students, and elders came to him, sharing their stories, frustrations, and fears. He listened, absorbing everything, carrying their voices as his own. Soon, his quiet gatherings turned into organized assemblies, with more and more people flocking to hear him speak. One evening, Simon called for a gathering under the wide branches of an ancient Iroko tree, said to be as old as Uzii itself. Hundreds of people came, some from distant towns, many traveling by foot for hours. As the last glimmers of sunlight faded, he began to speak, his voice clear and steady. He spoke of the Biafran spirit, of the right to live with dignity, and of the dream that had been denied for so long. "We are not a people to be erased," he said, looking out at the crowd. "We have lived in the shadows, but now is our time to step into the light. No more silence, no more waiting." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing into the night. But Simon knew that words alone would not bring change. To secure a future for Biafra, he needed to build a movement powerful enough to withstand the forces of the Nigerian state. He needed allies, strategies, and resources, and above all, he needed to keep his people safe from the coming storm. As word of his return spread, Nigerian authorities grew nervous. They sent more soldiers into Uzii and neighboring towns, intimidating villagers and spreading warnings. Local leaders were pressured to distance themselves from Simon, and anyone caught showing him support was labeled a traitor. The crackdown was swift, and the fear was palpable. Families whispered in hushed voices at night, wondering if their support for Simon would bring danger to their doorsteps. But Simon was undeterred. He had learned in Europe that any movement worth fighting for would face resistance. He reached out to international allies, seeking help from activists, human rights organizations, and journalists who had the power to amplify his message. Slowly, the world began to take notice. Reports of the oppression in Biafra began to leak beyond Nigeria's borders, reaching news outlets and spreading across social media. But with increased attention came greater risks. Nigerian authorities soon targeted Simon directly, tracking his movements and threatening his supporters. One night, soldiers stormed a village meeting where Simon was supposed to speak. By luck or fate, he had been delayed, narrowly avoiding capture. Yet many of his followers were arrested, some of whom would not see freedom again. Simon's allies warned him to be cautious, urging him to stay hidden, to speak only when safe. But Simon refused to be silenced. He would not lead from the shadows. He would stand alongside his people, even if it meant risking everything. One afternoon, as he walked through the forest path to meet with a group of supporters, he came upon Njoku, the old oracle, who seemed to have been waiting for him. The oracle's eyes, deep and wise, searched Simon's face, as if measuring the man he had become. "Simon," Njoku began, his voice soft but steady, "the path you walk is one lined with thorns. The spirits of our ancestors are with you, but they cannot shield you
from all harm. There will come a time when you must decide what you are willing to sacrifice. Simon bowed his head, absorbing Njoku's words. He knew what the oracle meant. He had felt it in every decision he had made, every step he had taken. Whatever it takes, Simon replied, his voice resolute. I will not abandon my people. Njoku nodded, his gaze unwavering. Then may the spirits guide you, child of the forests. In the weeks that followed, Simon's movement gained even more traction. His supporters were willing to risk everything, inspired by his courage. They organized peaceful marches, holding banners that declared their pride in their heritage and their determination to live free. The people of Biafra stood together, stronger than they had been in decades, facing off against soldiers with nothing but their voices and their unity. As the world watched, Simon knew that they were nearing a point of no return. The Nigerian government issued an ultimatum, declaring that any further protest would be met with necessary force. The tension was like a coiled spring ready to snap. One evening, Simon gathered his closest allies under the same Iroko tree where he had first spoken. In the dim light, he laid out his final plans, knowing that this might be the last chance to make their voices heard. We have come this far, he told them, his voice strong yet gentle. Whatever happens next, know that we did not back down. We stood for something greater than ourselves. As he spoke, a quiet resolve filled the faces around him. They had each chosen to be part of this fight, knowing the risks, knowing the sacrifices they might be called upon to make. And they were ready. The next day, as dawn broke over Uzii, the people gathered once more, marching forward as one. Simon led them, his heart filled with both pride and an unshakable sense of purpose. He knew that whatever happened, they had already won in the eyes of their ancestors. The spirit of Biafra was alive, and Simon Ekpa, son of Uzii, would carry it forward no matter the cost. As the people of Uzii and beyond joined Simon in that dawn march, they knew they were walking into uncertain waters. Word had already spread that soldiers were stationed nearby, their orders clear and merciless. But fear no longer had a place in their hearts. Led by Simon, they marched through the village and out into the open plains where their voices could rise unrestrained. The march was silent at first. The only sounds were the steady footsteps of hundreds of people moving in unison, each step heavier with purpose than the last. The elders walked at the front with Simon, holding old Biafran flags they had kept hidden for years, their faces solemn and proud. Children walked hand in hand with their parents, glancing up at Simon as though he were a figure out of their ancestors' tales. They knew this day was a turning point, and they felt the spirit of Biafra alive in the air around them. As they reached the village's edge, Simon raised his fist high, signaling for the marchers to stop. Ahead, the Nigerian soldiers formed a rigid line, their faces hard and impassive. Behind them, trucks bristling with weapons stood in stark contrast to the banners and cloth flags of the Biafran people. The soldiers held their ground, their eyes fixed on the gathering crowd, waiting for the command to act. Simon stepped forward, his gaze steady and unwavering as he faced the line of armed men. He felt the stone given to him by Njoku in his pocket, its carvings now smooth from his constant grip. The oracle's words echoed in his mind. there will come a time when you must decide what you are willing to sacrifice. Simon knew this was that moment. In a calm, strong voice, Simon began to speak. He told the soldiers of the injustices his people had suffered, of the rights they had been denied, of the identity that had been stolen from them. He told them of a dream for Biafra, a place where no one would be silenced, where every child could grow up free. He spoke not just to the crowd behind him, but directly to the soldiers before him, hoping that his words would find a place in their hearts. But before he could finish, a commanding officer stepped forward, his voice booming over Simon's. "This gathering is unlawful. Disperse immediately or face the consequences." The crowd tensed, glancing at each other, but Simon remained firm. He turned back to his people, raising his hands to calm them. Then he faced the soldiers again and, in a voice as steady as iron, replied, "We are here in peace, but we are here to stay. Our voices will not be silenced." The commanding officer gave a nod, and the soldiers raised their weapons. Simon heard gasps behind him, felt the shuffling of feet as people instinctively recoiled. He could feel their fear rising, but he stood his ground, knowing that this was his moment to stand firm in the face of the darkness. Suddenly, a chant began to rise from the crowd, low and steady, gaining strength like a river breaking free from its banks. One by one, people joined in, lifting their voices into a powerful song, an ancient melody that had been sung in Uzii for generations, a song of resilience and hope. Simon's voice joined theirs, and together they filled the air with their defiance. Then, without warning, the soldiers moved forward and chaos erupted. Smoke filled the air, loud cracks broke the silence, and people scattered. But Simon stayed rooted in place, urging those nearest to him to stay calm. Some tried to shield him, but he refused to hide, his eyes blazing with determination as he continued chanting, even as the world seemed to break apart around him. Hours later, the smoke cleared, and the field was empty except for scattered banners and abandoned shoes. But the message had been sent. The world had watched. Reporters who had braved the crowd had captured the moment, and images of Simon standing tall in the face of oppression spread like wildfire across continents. His message, his fight for Biafra, was no longer just a story whispered in villages or a movement hidden in forests. It was now an undeniable cry for justice heard across the globe. In the days that followed, Simon went into hiding, knowing that he had become a marked man, but his spirit was unbroken. His people continued to gather in secret, sharing his words, planning their next steps, and vowing that they would not let their fight be in vain. The name Simon Ekpa became a rallying cry, a symbol of resistance, a reminder that one voice, grounded in truth and conviction, could stand against a nation. Despite the challenges, Simon knew they had crossed a line that could not be undone. He was a hunted man now, but he felt more free than ever. The dream of Biafra was alive, not just in Uzii, but in the hearts of all who heard his story. And as he moved through the hidden paths of his homeland, his footsteps accompanied only by the whispering trees, he felt the presence of his ancestors with him, guiding him, urging him forward. For Simon Ekpa, the journey was far from over. His path remained shrouded in danger, but he knew he would continue. He would keep fighting, keep resisting, keep inspiring, until Biafra was free. Simon knew that his life had changed forever. His face and his voice were now symbols, not only in Uzii, but throughout Biafra and beyond. People whispered his name in homes and marketplaces, in hushed gatherings and spirited debates. The Nigerian government painted him as a criminal, a rebel inciting discord. But to the people, he was a hero, a leader who was willing to risk everything to defend their rights to freedom. After the fateful confrontation, Simon moved cautiously through the villages and forests of Biafra, avoiding towns where soldiers had been stationed to find him. With a network of loyal supporters, he navigated safely between hidden camps, sharing his vision, uniting the people, and inspiring them to stand firm. Each camp he visited became a haven for his ideas, a place where people gathered to learn about the Biafran spirit, their history, and the principles of unity and self-determination. It was in one of these hidden camps that Simon met Amaka, a young woman whose courage and intelligence quickly won his respect. She had been a student in a distant city, studying history before being forced to return home due to government crackdowns on anyone connected to the movement. Amaka had witnessed firsthand the brutal consequences of speaking out and had lost friends to unjust arrests and attacks. But rather than being silenced, she had returned home with even more resolve. Together, Simon and Amaka formed a powerful partnership. They strategized, working late into the night, creating a vision for a Biafra that was not just free, but one that was built on fairness, education, and opportunity for all. Amaka became one of his closest allies, leading secret meetings with women in the villages, mobilizing them to become active in the movement, and encouraging them to teach their children about their heritage and history. However, as the movement grew, so did the danger. Government agents intensified their efforts to capture Simon, targeting those believed to be close to him. Amaka narrowly escaped arrest several times, and rumors began to spread that anyone caught supporting Simon Ekpa would face severe punishment. Despite this, people refused to be silenced. The spirit of Biafra had been awakened, and Simon's vision had taken root in the hearts of his people. Simon knew that he needed to find a way to broadcast his message to the world in a powerful, undeniable way. He and Amaka devised a bold plan to organize a large, peaceful demonstration that would draw international attention, where the people of Biafra could tell their story to the world themselves. They knew the risks. They knew that such an event would put thousands at risk of arrest or worse. But they also knew that without a major action, the plight of Biafra would remain hidden. The day of the demonstration arrived, and people gathered in the early dawn light, making their way to the chosen location, their faces resolute. They wore whites to signify peace and carried banners with messages of hope and unity, written in the languages of Biafra. Simon and Amaka moved through the crowd, reassuring people, reminding them of the importance of their mission. Old men, young mothers with babies on their backs, children holding hands, all had come to stand together as one. As the crowd reached the open field, soldiers were already there, blocking the way. Yet the people did not waver. Simon stepped forward, raising his hands, his voice calm and unwavering. "We are here in peace," he called out, his voice carrying across the field. "We are here to show the world that we are a people with dignity and dreams, with a heritage we will not allow to be erased." For a moment, the soldiers stood still, listening. But then, with a sharp command from their leader, they raised their weapons. The tension in the air was thick. Everyone felt the threat hanging above them. But instead of retreating, the people began to sing, a song of resilience and unity that had been passed down through generations. Their voices swelled together, filling the air with a spirit of defiance and love. And then, something extraordinary happened. As the soldiers stood in formation, some of them began to lower their weapons. They looked at the crowd, at the elderly men and women, at the young children clinging to their parents, and they hesitated. The spirit of Biafra was strong, so strong that it reached even the hearts of those who had been sent to silence it. The government, however, would not allow this defiance to go unpunished. The next day, news spread that authorities had issued a nationwide warrant for Simon's arrest, labeling him a threat to national security. The crackdown intensified. Homes were raided, supporters detained, and entire villages put under strict surveillance. The people of Biafra were living under constant fear, but their determination did not waver. Simon continued to walk from the shadows, finding ways to send messages to his people, encouraging them to stay strong, to hold on to their hope. He knew that this struggle was far from over, but he also knew that he had ignited something that could not be easily extinguished. His message was spreading, and the world was beginning to take notice. International journalists and human rights organizations were investigating the stories coming out of Biafra, and pressure was mounting on the Nigerian government to address the grievances of the Biafran people. One night, as Simon and Amaka sat together by a small fire, they reflected on how far they had come. They were both exhausted, worn down by the constant dangers, the losses, the sacrifices. But as they looked out at the night sky, they felt a renewed sense of purpose. "This is only the beginning," Simon said quietly, his gaze steady. "One day Biafra will be free. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but it will happen. Our people will not be forgotten." Amaka nodded, a spark of determination in her eyes. "And we will keep fighting, no matter how hard they try to silence us. Biafra is in our hearts, and no one can take that away." As dawn approached, they knew that the road ahead would be filled with even greater challenges. But they also knew that they were part of something much larger than themselves. They were carrying the hopes of a people who had been denied a voice for too long, and they would not rest until that voice was heard. In the face of every obstacle, Simon and his people would press forward, knowing that with each step, they brought Biafra closer to the freedom they had always dreamed of. And as long as the spirit of Biafra lived within them, they knew that their fight for justice, for dignity, and for their homeland would continue, stronger and more determined than ever. Look out for part 3. If you enjoyed this true life folktale story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Here, we share powerful, real-life stories of resilience, dreams, and triumph that will move and motivate you. By subscribing, you'll never miss a new story, and you'll be part of a community that believes in the strength of the human spirit. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more unforgettable stories that prove anything is possible.